Hi, my name's George Egerton-Warburton.
My name's Shannon Lyons.
My name is Tim Cutter.
I'm Rebecca Baumann.
Hi, I'm Rowbottam. I'm the curator and artist for Rounds. The idea for Rounds came about in June 2009 with the editor of the Rounds book, Matthew Giles, and I. We wanted to create a project where a group of Perth artists were working collaboratively over a very long period of time. The idea was to have a bit of a Chinese whispers approach where one artist was creating work and passed it on to another artist who then create a work in response. We then developed that idea over a series of 2 months where the artists were working simultaneously with each other over a 7-month period. There are 4 6-week rounds and a total of 29 artworks.
It's quite hard handing work over in this kind of intimate kind of conditions, because it's usually this kind of situation where you're exhibiting your work and you're not there to give it any context, and that can kind of work in your advantage sometimes, or it could work to your disadvantage. But when you're kind of meeting with somebody one-on-one to talk about your work and they're interrogating you, it is quite kind of, it's hard, yeah.
I suppose that I have approached the Rounds kind of continuation as a series of studies, if you like, on other people's practices and how they might join with mine. So I've kind of looked at it as thinking about the artists that came before me and the artists that will come after me, and my works somehow kind of bring those two artists closer together.
Shannon didn't actually give me the round 2 work that she was having in the exhibition. She gave me a small object which was about A5 in scale, and it was all bound up and compact, wrapped in some orange twine, and it was a bit more of a preliminary object to what she was going to have in the show. So it was like a research material, if you like. And so I responded to that, and due to the way she had presented it and packaged it, it was this, a piece of paper which had been concertinaed and then bound such that there were all these linear qualities to the object, which I then responded with via a series of drawings which had a strong linear focus. And yeah, I was interested in the way in which she had compacted the, I suppose, narrative of her activity and being involved with this object, which had a series of lines and drawn marks and whatnot, and how she'd compressed that history of activity into quite a finite and secretive object. And I was interested in teasing out that narrative thread and deconstructing the narrative and exploring ways in which to manipulate narrative and whatnot, yeah.
On this project I really wanted to keep within the confines of my own practice, so I wanted to make work that I would already make, and so I sort of thought of it in terms of where you get ideas from, or like how things start. So for me that was really quite it was quite simply that. It was just sort of thinking about this sort of gentleness, and actually just using the same material, and I've used a lot of fans in my work, so it's like utilising a fan in that sort of way or something. So it was something with just a small thing like that which I decided to take.
Everyone approached the Rounds process quite differently. Some decided to respond to more formal elements such as titles and aesthetics and colours, whereas others took more of a philosophical or conceptual response. For instance, someone like Rebecca Baumann decided to respond to simple titles such as On and Off, which was a work created by Tim Carter, where the artist was taking on and off a t-shirt. Rebecca responded by using a fan with a soul streamer on a timer where every second minute it's turned on, and every 2 minutes it's turned on or off.
I had a conversation with Bennett about kind of elements to do with outsourcing and giving a work to someone else to finish. And I also was kind of privy to a studio viewing of Bennett's, and he had a couple of really big black boards with some kind of paint splatters on them where he'd played cricket with a paint-covered ball, and I was quite interested in those kind of residual marks from a game that was obviously over when I visited the studio. And he also had a really big object which looked a little bit like a motor, a white motor with a big drip of oil coming out of it on a motor stand, that I had actually made or helped make for another Perth-based artist, Paul Capone, a few years prior. And Bennett had basically taken to this object with a massive metal or wooden pole, essentially, and bashed it to bits. So something that I had spent a lot of time making and finishing had been kind of completely destroyed by Bennett, and I thought it was kind of an interesting process to maybe look at Bennett's work and think about my practice, which is a lot of the time it's about perfection and finishing something incredibly well, and looking at that kind of disparity between our two practices and try and kind of force them a bit closer together. So that's where the targets came from, me thinking about precision and outsourcing in particular, because it was the first time I'd kind of looked at employing any kind of third party to have a part in the work. So I kind of was mucking around with CNC routering and some CAD design to muck up, and we had to basically establish the work.
One of the main kind of aims of rounds was to have a process where artists were generating ideas, and it's very rare for artists to actually go to their peers for influence or for inspiration to create works, whereas in rounds this is quite prominently the case. So the idea that an artist was initially inspired or triggered by another peer's work is quite central to the whole premise of rounds, and it has produced some very interesting results.
One work in particular I made was a rap song, and that was in response to Rebecca Baumann's work, which was a streamer which was attached to a fan, and it was falling up or rising and falling, and so I was responding to certain themes in her work, and a lot of her work's about celebration and collaboration, and they're all quite kinetic works. Well, this is my interpretation, of course, and so I begun with the line, I schemed a tumour of merriment to grow, and I worked from that line, and I wrote this rap, and it was also an attempt to stay true to my own practice, I guess, because that's part of the process, I guess, responding to other people's work in your own style or fashion, and so part of the song was actually about some of my work as well, and some issues I have, and the beat was actually made out of chicken sounds and meth lab explosion sounds, which is something I've kind of been making work about. So yeah, it was a pretty fun work to make, and I like how it sits with Rebecca's work next to it.
I was responding to Elise and Jürgen's work, and they made 3 videos which at the time when we did the exchange were going to be hung on, I think they were going to all be hung in sort of a triangle, and there was going to be a small fan which was going to move the work, and so I sort of started thinking about using a small fan to affect like this material, and so creating and so I sort of, a lot of my work before has been really loud and actually noisy, and so I think this was a chance to try and make something which is quiet, but it was quite visually loud and spectacular, I suppose, but it's quite gentle as well. So when the fan's on, the fan just sort of rotates from side to side, and it just causes sort of slight, just gentle movement.